Hello, gang. Welcome into another one. So, today I'd like to talk about one of the strangest conflicts that are currently going on right now. It's a conflict that I have no idea which side to pick to root for because I really don't like either side. Either side has kind of done some things that I don't necessarily agree with, but one of the sides is improving, which makes me kind of want to root for them. And the conflict is Armenia versus Azerbaijan. Two countries that you've probably never heard of. And they are in the Caucasus, which is a mountain range that Caucasians come from, apparently. But not really true, but I mean, it could be true, but it's a lot different than that. So, this is a map of kind of where they are at in the world. So, you have Russia on one side, you have Georgia, you have Turkey, and then you have Iran. And so, this is kind of the conflict. The area in red is disputed territory. Legally, it is owned by Azerbaijan. Literally, it is controlled by Armenia. And there was a war and there was a peace deal, and we'll get into some of the conflicts that they have and go over. I have a video for the current conflict and what is going on. I also have a meme here because Ganja is a city in Azerbaijan. So, potheads, if they knew anything, they would probably support Azerbaijan, but besides the point. So, first to go over Azerbaijan. So, it is a resource rich country. Oil and natural gas has a lot of resources. And so, but it's also a pretty corrupt state. Like, the economic freedom here is not great. Now, it is also the people there are very poor despite having all the resources, because a lot of times, a lot of dictatorial governments, the resources go to the top and the people are left with nothing. So, both Azerbaijan and Armenia used to be part of the old USSR. So, the Russians. And the Russians are actually a big reason for that territorial split because they didn't really care about ethnic minorities when they drew lines. They just drew them wherever they saw fit, and that's the line, and that's how it's going to go. The other thing about Azerbaijan is a majority Sunni Muslim country, second, I think, only to Iran. But it is a secular state, and a majority of the Sunni Muslims do not practice the religion. There's drinking, some things that you wouldn't find in more conservative states. Now, Azerbaijan is also famous for not just oil and natural resources, but one of its most prominent natural resources is a prehistoric fish, a sturgeon, like showcased in this photo. Prehistoric fish that people actually want for their eggs. Their eggs make a dish called caviar, which if you've ever had it, it is disgusting. Caviar is not good at all, but people like it. I guess it's an acquired taste, and I never acquired that taste. So, like I said, Azerbaijan country, and they've kind of been in conflict ever since the Soviets drew the lines where they did. Now, it heightened when the collapse of the Soviet Union. And so they are there. Their primary ally is Turkey. They are Sunni Muslim, but they are ethnically Turkish as well. So Turkey is their primary ally. And now we'll move on to Armenia. Now, Armenia is a country famous for having more people live outside of it than in of it. And this was mainly due to an event where the Turks came in and tried to genocide all of the Armenians, the Armenian genocide. Okay. And so, like you said, their most famous export is people, and probably the best thing, in my opinion, they've exported is Surge from System of a Down. But, looking at it, they don't have much in the way of natural resources, and they're kind of situated, they're sandwiched between two countries that do not like them, Turkey and Azerbaijan. Now, they were, their primary ally was Russia. Now, that may have changed in recent years, but that's been their primary ally. Russia has 2 military bases in Armenia. Probably one of the reasons Armenia is still a country, because Russia has backed them up. Okay, and they are a majority Christian country. Now, as you can see in this picture, like the whole area used to be pretty much Armenia, and it's shrunken to the size of where it is today. Now, getting into the conflict a little bit, just some of the history of the conflict before we go to the video. It is called, and I'm probably going to pronounce this a little bit wrong, Nagorno-Karabakh. Okay, it's an autonomous region run by Armenia, but owned by Azerbaijan. Okay, in this conflict, it says it began in 1988. Now, the Turks and the Armenians were fighting before that, but this specific conflict started in 1988. Full-scale war in the 1990s, ceasefire in 1994, a 4-day war in 2016, and then we have some recent developments on the end of this conflict. As far as allies, Turkey and Pakistan for Azerbaijan, and really nothing for Armenia despite Russia being there. Now, but even though Armenia doesn't have the allies, Azerbaijan suffered the most losses in the conflict. Now, Armenia does have technically allies, and those allies would be in this collective security treaty organization, which is going to be Russia and a bunch of the stands. Okay, so it's going to be Armenia, Belarus, which isn't one of the stands, but Belarus is pretty much just a puppet for Russia. And then you have Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and then non-observer states, Serbia and Afghanistan. Now, Afghanistan is going to be tough because there's kind of a conflict going on. Now, Azerbaijan and Georgia and Uzbekistan were members of this. Uzbekistan actually twice. So there are some allies. Now, whether those allies, it's kind of a weak group, not a lot of big populations there. Uzbekistan's the bigger population than a lot of the other stands that are mentioned here. But they do have some allies, and Russia would be the primary ally that they had in the past. So we talked a little bit about the Armenian genocide just to cover this up to kind of give some context of kind of what happened. It's a mass murder and expulsion of 1.5 ethnic Armenians carried out by Turkey and adjoining regions from the Ottoman government from 1914 to 1923. And this caused Armenians to spread throughout the world. This was an absolutely awful event that still today, many countries deny that happened. Specifically, Turkey, Azerbaijan deny that it's happened. But even across the world, there are many countries that still haven't recognized this atrocity from happening. Now, the other thing, so in the war, there was a massacre of Azerbaijanis. So, like, neither side here The Armenian genocide definitely had more people that ended up being killed, but it's not to say that they are 100% innocent, because there's the Koljolai massacre, which what happened here as Azerbaijan was retreating through the war, Armenia stood on the border and killed them as they were trying to escape back into Azerbaijan towards the end of the war. So they just stood there rather than letting the people peacefully go into Azerbaijan. They shot and killed them before they could get back into Azerbaijan. So this conflict is extremely tense. Okay, and it was heightened by the war. And so Armenia was supplied by Russia and Greece, Azerbaijan by Israel, Ukraine, and also Russia. Now, Russia in the form of Chechnya, the Grey Wolves, and some other not great groups. So, but again, you start looking at the strength and the casualties. Azerbaijan seems to die a lot more in these conflicts when it goes up against Armenia. Despite, having probably superior military, Armenians fight a lot harder and a lot better than Azerbaijan. So now we'll go to the video, and this is done by Al Jazeera, which is owned by the Qatari government. But I like this video in particular because they have a panel of one person from Azerbaijan and one person from Armenia. And you can see by the video and the debate that goes on that there may not be an end to this conflict. Both sides believe that they are right, and they are defending what is right. But the first part of the video is actually going to cover some of the recent developments of this conflict.
Will Armenia and Azerbaijan go to war again? Both sides blame each other for the fighting on their border. Can their decades of animosity be resolved? This is Inside Story. With roots dating back to the collapse of the Soviet Union, Armenia and Azerbaijan have been in dispute over the Nagorno-Karabakh region for decades. It's recognized internationally as part of Azerbaijan, but controlled by ethnic Armenian forces. Their war ended in a ceasefire in 1994, but there's been regular battles near the border ever since. Both accuse each other of triggering the latest artillery bombardment and drone attacks north of Nagorno-Karabakh. Fighting since Sunday has killed at least 16 people, mostly soldiers, on both sides, but at least one civilian too.
So 16 people, once again, a majority of the people that died were Azerbaijani, including one 2-star general from the Azerbaijani military.
Azerbaijan's president, Ilham Aliyev, has sacked the foreign minister, accusing him of meaningless negotiations with Armenia.
See, that kind of goes into this conflict. The person you set in that place for peace, for the peace negotiations, well, we don't want peace. You're done. You're fired. It's a total Donald Trump move. You're fired. But yeah, the person supposed to negotiate peace has been fired from Azerbaijan.
Robin Forestier-Walker reports.
Large crowds of protesters in Baku demanding the Azeri government declares war on Armenia.
Which is absolutely crazy. Like, it's a peaceful protest, which generally doesn't happen in Azerbaijan because the government is dictatorial. But they were protesting going to war with Armenia over these strikes. Like, they want the war. They want to reclaim the land that they believe is theirs. And they are protesting to go to war. Now, it's a peaceful protest for physical violence, which is a very interesting dynamic. But yeah, they are protesting because they want to go to war.
Some demonstrators managed to enter Parliament early on Wednesday and were dispersed. The crowds are highly unusual in tightly controlled Azerbaijan, an indication of the national mood. An army general was one of 11 Azeri servicemen killed in 3 days of fighting on the border with Armenia. The Armenian government reports the deaths of 4 personnel.
Man, you just look at the face on that one kid. Like, he is totally distraught, which makes the situation even more dangerous because it's going to be more emotional. But yeah, just look at his face. He's totally distraught. And you kind of feel bad for him. They're in this conflict. They're kind of fighting these both sides and they believe they're right. And the Armenians believe they're right. But there are people in the middle of this conflict that are affected by some of the battles that have went on.
The latest fighting is north of the disputed territory of Nagorno-Karabakh. Internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan, it's controlled by Armenian forces. Some 30,000 people died in the regional war between the former Soviet republics in the 1990s. Azerbaijan has accused Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan of undermining long-standing peace talks chaired by the so-called OSCE Minsk group. On Wednesday, a lull in the fighting allowed monitors to observe damage to civilian homes. Armenia's foreign ministry told Al Jazeera that de-escalation was now the priority.
War is not an alternative. There is no alternative to the peaceful settlement. We remain committed to this, and we will work towards de-escalation and establishing an environment which helps, an atmosphere which helps peace and which favors the negotiating process.
Which is the right thing to do. You want to say, whether it's Armenia or Azerbaijan, the people want war in Azerbaijan, but you want to de-escalate and kind of try to create peace. But as far as like creating peace and having a resolution that both sides will like, that's going to be an extremely difficult one. Because like I said before, this territory is occupied by Armenians, but owned by Azerbaijan. And so, like, are the Armenians going to walk their troops out of the territory, give it back to Azerbaijan? Or is Azerbaijan going to let Armenia have some of their territory? Like, maybe divide it in half, like, as far as a solution? Or give the southern half so they get a path over here to Niaks and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but this is an autonomous community of Azerbaijan that's kind of cut off from the rest of the state. But as far as like a peaceful resolution in this conflict, it is extremely difficult and extremely tough because the Armenians don't want to leave and Azerbaijan wants their territory back.
This is the biggest escalation since a 4-day conflict in April 2016 that saw some 200 people killed. Russia and Iran have offered to mediate.
How bad does that have to be for Iran to mediate? Like, they seem like the last people that want to mediate, but Iran's in an interesting situation here because Israel is very friendly with Azerbaijan. Iran hates Israel, but Azerbaijan is mostly Sunni Muslim or Shia Muslim, and so is Iran. So it's an interesting situation because they share an ethnicity, share a religion, but Azerbaijan's doing a lot of business with the enemy in Israel. Azerbaijan wants to get the Iron Dome technology that Israel has to protect it, to protect Azerbaijan. And they've also bought a lot of weapons from Israel as well. But Azerbaijan pretty much buys weapons from anybody that'll sell them to them as well. As far as Armenia, almost all of their military equipment is from Russia. Now, Azerbaijan has Russia, United States, South Africa, Germany, Poland. Like, they have all sorts of military equipment from around the world because they're willing to buy it. Now, Azerbaijan's military budget is as much as the total budget in Armenia. Now, Armenia is a very fast developing nation. In 2018, Armenia had a revolution where they overthrew the government. It was a peaceful revolution. And ever since that revolution, they've been trending upward. And it is a really great thing to see with Armenia, but there's still a lot of corruption because even though the prime minister changed, some of the people in the parliamentary system are still some of the people that were a part of that corrupt system with the previous prime minister. So we'll get back to the video.
Turkey says it stands with Azerbaijan.
So yeah, Turkey, they're going to stand with Azerbaijan. And this is a exact image of the leader of Turkey. It's just kind of a funny picture. But yeah, Turkey changes the dynamics. If Turkey goes in, this conflict's going to escalate quite a bit.
Unless the renewed fighting can be resolved, the risk of a wider conflict remains. Robin Forrest, Walker, Al Jazeera.
Let's introduce the panel. In the Azeri capital, Baku, Hikmet Hajiyev, assistant to the president of Azerbaijan. In Yerevan, the capital of Armenia, Arsen Kharatyan, former advisor.
Those are some eyebrows. Very distinguished eyebrows.
To Armenia's prime minister. And here in Doha, Ibrahim Freihat, associate professor of conflict resolution at the Doha Institute. A welcome to you all. I want to begin
This is actually pretty cool, even though I don't like Al Jazeera for some of the work that they do. But they bring in a mediator from Qatar to talk about this conflict with Azerbaijan and Armenia. So Qatar is kind of a neutral party in this conflict between the two, which this is a great stage for debate. Now it is here on the stream, but you can also watch on their website. I watched this and I said, well, I should probably stream because this video, it's a really good debate and it really explains both sides of the conflict. So, and we'll get into it. I had a comment in the chat, fishing in the Caspian Sea. That would be awesome. There's a lot of species of sturgeon, pike perch. There's a lot to like about the Caspian Sea, which as a side note, and I'd like to thank Anthony for getting me sidetracked a little bit. Caspian Sea is interesting. It's actually kind of a lake because that's 1/3 the salt water of the ocean. So freshwater fish can still live in the Caspian Sea. So it is a very interesting body of water, huge body of water, and probably some really good fishing.
In Baku with Hikmet Hajiyev. You've been very clear that you've said that this is Armenia undermining, and that's the word you've used, any peace treaties, any negotiations when it comes to Nagorno-Karabakh. Why do you say that?
Thank you, and I also welcome everyone. Actually, Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict started with the illegal use of force by Armenia occupying Nagorno-Karabakh and 7 adjacent regions of Azerbaijan. And physically, our Azerbaijani territories are under the military occupation of Armenia, and Azerbaijan has 1 million more IDPs and refugees. And since the mid-90s, we have a negotiation process, and this continues. And we have a ceasefire regime, but ceasefire is not a peace. Unfortunately, we have a tendency that Armenian side tries to hide itself behind the ceasefire regime and to annex the sovereign territories of Azerbaijan. And we also see illegal activities.
So that's not really true as far as like diplomatic means. They barely even talk to each other. Like it has to be set up in another country for them to actually sit down and talk with one another. Like they don't talk, like there's not a lot of diplomacy going on here. But he's kind of painting the picture. And you're kind of seeing the picture painted here from the Azerbaijani side of things, the way they see the conflict.
We also see illegal settlement in the occupied territories of Azerbaijan. And we also have an illegal framework of the negotiation process. Helsinki Final Act and United Nations Security Council resolutions constitute legal political framework for the resolution of the conflict, which demands immediate, unconditional, and full withdrawal of Armenian troops from the occupied territories. We also have within the Minsk Group roadmap of the negotiation process, the concept is based on the step-by-step step-by-step resolution of the conflict, with the key element here is a withdrawal of Armenian troops from the occupied territories of Azerbaijan in a step-by-step approach, and also return of Azerbaijani IDPs and refugees who are in 30 years living as an IDPs and exiled from their homes.
So you look at the terrain here, and it's probably one of the reasons that explains why there are so many more Azerbaijanis that get killed in conflict than Armenians, because they have the high ground, they have the mountain ground, and the Azerbaijanis are coming down from the valley and trying to get up, and you always want the high ground. I mean, Darth Vader didn't learn that one the hard way. But yeah, so that's one of the reasons why there are more casualties in the Azerbaijan side of things, and why this conflict would have to probably be more emotionally motivated unless steps in for them to go, because they will get slaughtered trying to take back these mountains.
That's an overall concept of the negotiation process. Unfortunately, when Pashinyan came to power, we had an expectation that he's going to fulfill different or pursue different political agenda rather than the previous governments of Armenia. Unfortunately, we see that Pashinyan's statements, contradictory statements, undermining the format and also substance of the negotiation process. Armenia also tries to evade its responsibility for the occupation and aggression they have committed against Azerbaijan, and also tries not to fulfill its even obligations within the Minsk group process. And it's an undermining the process. In the meantime, it's a disrespect to the Minsk group process and also wider international community. And in general, as a result of this conflict, I always pose this question to my Armenian colleagues with whom we have a discussion. What Armenia has achieved as a result of this conflict?
Let's do that. Let's put that question.
Yeah. Well, you could also ask the same thing of Azerbaijan, because they've achieved nothing in this conflict as well. Like, there's been nothing achieved in this conflict. And, like about 1990, 2020, 30 years, nothing's been achieved on either side. It is still a thing that escalates every once in a while. So just kind of going back to Azerbaijan a little bit, and this is what's going to complicate Russia's relationship with Armenia. So Azerbaijan has a lot of natural gas, and then they have a pipeline. As you can see, this pipeline here following it through in Bulgaria meets up with a Russian pipeline. So Russia can still sell gas to Europe through an Azerbaijan pipeline. And so if Azerbaijan didn't allow them to sell gas through the pipeline, Russia is going to be very economically hurt. So, but they are allies of Armenia. And so that's where it kind of complicates things from the Russia sphere of things, is they want to play both sides. They want to sell weapons to both sides, but at the end of the day, they may join Azerbaijan against their old allies, Armenia, because it is more economically advantageous for them to do so.
Put that question to Arsen Karatyan. He's in Yerevan, the capital of Armenia. He's a former advisor to Armenia's Prime Minister. It's all your fault, says our guest in Baku. What do you make of that?
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I also want to welcome all the panelists and, of course, our viewers, and for the interest in the region. In fact, I'm quite surprised about the faults, talking about faults now. I don't actually understand how one can talk about faults when just about 5 minutes ago we were hearing the Foreign Minister of Azerbaijan threatening possible bombing of the nuclear power plant in the territory.
So that was actually a legitimate threat. Like, don't fuck with me, I'll blow up your nuclear power plant. It's kind of that thing. It's like, you are vulnerable, don't fuck with me. That was kind of the rhetoric that was thrown out there in probably more politically correct terms. But if you read kind of those terms, that's what you kind of draw out with it. It's like, stop this aggression, you are vulnerable, and we can attack you where you are vulnerable.
Of Armenia. We're not talking about Nagorno-Karabakh right now. We're talking about sovereign Armenia territory. We're talking internationally recognized borders of Armenia. What I want to make very clear, this is not just another escalation between Armenia and Azerbaijan. This is a very clear and direct threat to democracy. This is a threat to democracy. This is an attack against the democracy that we're trying to build in Armenia. We have, in 2018, Armenia went through one of the biggest and the most major change in its history, recent history.
So that is really a Western appeal. They are he's lobbying here for somebody like in America to say, well, we want to defend democracy, so we must join Armenia. It's kind of that Western appeal. Now, technically, Azerbaijan's a democracy too, but the joke is the results are released before the votes are cast in Azerbaijan, so it's kind of a dictatorship under the guise of a democracy. But that's not the excuse, kind of like it's a work in progress in Armenia as far as a democracy as well. There's a lot of corruption in both these countries that goes on.
This was the 2018 Velvet Revolution, which brought about the most legitimate government in the country since the mid-90s. And we are undertaking a large agenda of reforms. We have a very popular government here, going through a lot of painful changes inside the country, but the people and the countries in the neighborhood, despotic regimes, seem to be quite nervous about. What I am feeling here, what we are seeing here, is internal issues in Azerbaijan is triggering a regime to start and to further create animosity with Armenians.
And this is where it gets kind of good. So he just attacks him. He's like, you know what? It's your fault. And so you're projecting on us with all the shit that's going on in your country. It's like my country's better than yours. It's kind of great.
Armenophobia, trying to direct its own public to actually draw attention or diverge from the real and the serious issues that we believe the country will have and has. We had corrupt regime ourselves. We know how it works. We know how hard it is to be able to actually handle a regime like that. However, Armenia, a young democracy, a country with a reformist government, has no reason to attack anyone. What we're seeing from our Azerbaijani colleagues there, or from Azerbaijan itself, is targeting civilian population villages in the territory proper of Armenia, shelling and sending bombs and rockets already for 4 or 5 days.
So, on this, I mean, most of the casualties in this event have been of Azerbaijani. And so, like the shelling and stuff like that, there's been some equipment that's been destroyed, drones been destroyed, a UAV's been destroyed. But I don't know if the claims that they're constantly shelling civilians is true. But it certainly plays to the narrative that he is selling. As far as what I've seen kind of reported, it's mostly been on equipment, it's mostly been buildings. But there hasn't been like bomb after bomb after bomb. It's just been one here, one there. Take a social media video, post it on Twitter, and hope to get kind of a following that way.
What we're saying, we're committed, and our foreign minister stated it very clear yesterday. We're committed to the peace process. We believe that the format of the negotiations, where Russia, United States, and France are co-chairing the OSCE Minsk group.
Russia, the United States, and France. I don't think that peace deal is going to happen unless you bring Turkey to the table as well. But I don't think Armenia is willing to bring Turkey to the table to negotiate those peace. And he didn't bring up Iran because, yeah, you don't want Iran on those peace process. But yeah, this is a great kind of appeal. He's explaining himself very well on what Armenia is doing. Now, the conflict started with Azerbaijanis dying, so unless he's saying, well, they killed themselves, it does look like it started at least with some Armenian aggression on this front. Now, there may have been some Azerbaijani aggression that wasn't reported before this, but the first people killed in this resurgence of the conflict were Azerbaijani.
Is the only format to continue the negotiations, to continue constructive negotiations between the parties. Come back to the negotiations table. Why are you threatening? Why are you sending bombs? If you're going to continue with this language, obviously you're going to receive an answer and response. This is impossible
Well,
to talk.
let's talk about that. Let's talk about the negotiations. Let's bring in our guest in Baku, Hikmet Hajiev. What you're hearing from Yerevan is that Armenia is on its way to being a beacon of democracy in the region, and actually it's surrounded by despotic regimes such as yours that are making that more difficult. Azerbaijan has just sacked its foreign minister, saying the negotiations were meaningless. Why aren't you going back to the negotiating table?
First of all, democracy, I believe, is in the last thing that Armenia can talk about. And Arsen Kharatyan also joined Pashinyan's government and then afterwards have been sacked. And currently, what's in a building in Azerbaijan is a revolutionary dictatorship. And also, if Armenia claims for the democracy and democracy doesn't conduct ethnic cleansing and occupation to another country. And what's going on internally in Armenia, and we see that entire political system is in crisis. Journalists, politicians, and judges are under the arrest. That is in general description.
This is more like he's painting the picture. He's like, this guy said all this shit about Azerbaijan. Now I'm going to shit on Armenia.
Of Armenia's so-called revolutionary dictatorship. And what regards to the recent incident that happened in the border area between Armenia and Azerbaijan, it's yet another illustration of the hypocrisy that Armenian government is pursuing. From one side, occupying territories of Azerbaijan, they talk about a peace. From another side, on a deliberate manner, they attacked in a border area between two countries. But Armenia also conducted notorious ethnic cleansing in the continent of Europe after the Second World War against the Azerbaijani civilians. And we also see in 2016.
Okay, so that's not necessarily true. There was the massacre. But as far as like the ethnic cleansing or genocide argument, I don't think that holds any weight. There were people killed because they were at conflict, which they've always pretty much always been at conflict, but it really wasn't on a genocide, at least to the extent of the Armenian genocide. And it wasn't a massacre like the massacre that happened when the people were retreating back into Azerbaijan.
When Armenia deliberately, in a discriminate manner, attacked Azerbaijani civilians in the border area, what's rational? Because from Azerbaijani perspective, you are claiming that Azerbaijan has started. If Azerbaijan has started militarily, it makes sense for Azerbaijan to start operation in the Nagorno-Karabakh area to liberate our occupied territories. What's in a sense to start an operation in the border area? But I know the answer.
Hikmet,
The
let
strategic
me
assessment
just
of
ask you a
Armenia is
direct question.
evade
Let me ask you a direct
responsibility
question.
Okay. So yeah, these are some pictures of Azerbaijan, the buildings that were attacked, which kind of goes against the Armenian diplomats' response saying how the fighting kind of started. And as you can kind of see, it's just kind of throwing shit at the wall, hoping something sticks back and forth because they really don't like each other. They really don't like each other. And if they had the opportunity, Armenia would wipe Azerbaijan off the map, and Azerbaijan would wipe Armenia off the map. That's how much they absolutely hate each other.
Why has Ilham Aliyev said these negotiations are meaningless?
In general, we're 30 years Azerbaijan is engaged in negotiation process. Every time we see that Armenian side tries to create auxiliary technical elements to evade from the responsibility. One day they say that let's change the format. Another day they say that we don't have environment conducive to the peace. Next day they say that let's talk about a ceasefire confidence building measures. My question is
Okay, I'm not sure what's going on in this picture. It just looks like a dirty room. Looks like the bed was messed up, but I don't know if that's a result of like shell fire or anything like that. It just kind of looks like a messy room to me. But it might have been shell fire, but that's what it kind of looks like to me. It's just a messy bedroom.
you occupied territories of Azerbaijan. You conducted ethnic cleansing. Physically, Armenian armed forces in the sovereign territories of Azerbaijan. You have a state responsibility under the international law.
That's not a bad mustache. He does look kind of like a pedophile, though.
Withdraw your troops, and then we'll have a settlement in the conflict process. Without withdrawing of the conflict, without withdrawing your troops, how we can have a settlement in the process?
So that's Azerbaijan's terms and conditions. They want Armenia to withdraw all their troops from the Nagorno-Karabakh. All their troops, and then we can start the negotiation. But Armenia is never going to do that because the people that live there are Armenians. You'd be asking them to leave the area that they grew up and lived just because Stalin drew arbitrary lines to where everything is. And that's what makes it pretty tough, is because it's owned by Azerbaijan, occupied by Armenians. Azerbaijanis don't like Armenians. Armenians don't like Azerbaijanis. And it is a mountainous terrain that would result in the loss of a lot of life to try to retake, especially from the Azerbaijan side.
Exactly. I will come back to you in just one moment, but I want to bring in our guest in Doha, Ibrahim Fayhat, Professor of Conflict Resolution at the Doha Institute. You've taken a close look at the role of both Russia and Turkey in this conflict. Two key powers within the region that still haven't managed to actually bring about a satisfactory resolution to the conflict. Are they making more trouble, or are they serious partners for peace between these two countries?
I think this is a very important question, and it's very important we look at the conflict not only from the lenses of a conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but from the wider, larger situation, regional situation, and particularly the role of Russia, number one, and also the role of Turkey. Russia is known as to be a major player in this conflict and is trying to manage the conflict between, per se, its former colonies in Armenia and Azerbaijan as well, part of it. Russia is a major supplier of arms to Azerbaijan, but also a close ally with Armenia as being part.
So there it is, just kind of Russia playing both sides. And now, just to bring up this chart again, one of the reasons why Russia's playing both sides is because their natural gas pipeline in Bulgaria joins the Azerbaijan pipeline. So, because of the Azerbaijan pipeline, they can sell gas into Europe by teaming up, sell some of their gas into Europe. Versus Azerbaijan being able to take the whole market, Russia needs that pipeline to leech onto to sell some of their oil and natural gas into Europe.
Part of the CSTO Collective Security Treaty organization that Russia leads, and Armenia has been frustrated with not receiving the support that it aspires to see from Russia. And Russia is trying to manage this situation, and there is also the increased risk of Russia being sending peacekeeping, quote unquote, forces, which would be seen as an occupying forces, which both countries are concerned about. So there is definitely the Russian role here is seriously impacting the conflict between the two. And also there is the security component between Armenia and Turkey, as you know, with the historical rivalry and the historical conflict between the two parties. And Armenia, from security point of view, seeing itself being sandwiched between two enemies, Azerbaijan and Turkey. And Turkey already did not hesitate to declare its position in support of Azerbaijan.
Now, Pakistan also did not hesitate to declare their support for Azerbaijan. And I've also seen, it's Azerbaijan Twitter, so take it as you like, but Israel has been an ally of Azerbaijan in the past because I think Israel wants to use Azerbaijan to perform operations in Iran. So it's one of those interesting, complex kind of relationships that this area brings in, because you may have enemies fighting on the same side if this broke out into a larger conflict.
So the Turkish role also is important. And here we have also the Turkey-Russia model emerged in the last few years of the reduction of tension in Syria, and now working together in the Astana talks, and now also they're working.
Yeah, so Armenia did help Russia in Syria and the Assad regime in Russia, which is one of the reasons why I can't really get sold or bought onto helping Armenia in this case. Helping somebody like Assad in Syria with Russia is kind of like a line in the sand. But on the other hand, you have Azerbaijan, which is a dictatorship owned by Turkey, which is another country that I'm not fond of for its influence in the world and its influence, especially the things it's doing in northern Iraq and northern Syria to the Kurdish people.
working together in Libya to come up with an arrangement. And who knows? So this could be the next candidate, this conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, where Russia and Turkey could come close together and try to manage. And of course, there is also
That is scary. That is 100% scary. If Russia takes the side of Azerbaijan and works together with Turkey, Armenia is done. Like, I know the Greeks support them, and which would bring an interesting dynamic if it was NATO, because you'd have two NATO countries on opposite sides. But if Russia joins Azerbaijan and joins up with Turkey, it makes the world a lot more dangerous place and could lead to actually, I would think, a global conflict if they teamed up and went into Armenia. Which is, this is a minor conflict. Most people can't point out Azerbaijan or Armenia on a map. But if Turkey and Russia get involved on the side of Azerbaijan, this could grow rather quickly. Not saying, oh, well, World War III doomsday, but you have to look at it because Russia does a lot in Azerbaijan, and they've been allies with Armenia in the past. So I think ideally they would sit out and kind of fund both sides. But if Turkey gives them a deal they can't refuse, like, they're going to be opportunistic in this situation, especially the way Russia's kind of falling economically around the world. So it's an interesting dynamic that he just brought up.
always a concern about this external intervention is to what extent that they're really trying to resolve the conflict or to maintain or keep their interest in the situation.
Well,
The bottom line here,
let's bring it,
Imran,
Ibrahim. Let's bring in our guests in Yerevan and in Baku, because it's actually quite a crucial point that you make.
Regional
Let's
paradigm.
bring let's
Sorry,
bring in
can I just
Hikmat
intervene
Hajiev.
shortly?
Hikmat, let me
Yeah.
just ask you a question. It's the question I think
Yes.
you're about to answer anyway. How useful is the Russian role? How useful is the Turkish role?
Azerbaijan has a strategic partnership relations with Russia and a neighboring country, and Russia is also one of the co-chair countries. In the meantime, Azerbaijan has a strategic partnership and very good and close relations, brotherly ties with Turkey. But here, the professor also mentioned Turkish-Armenian relations and Azerbaijan, and no one actually is seeking enmity towards an Armenia. Armenia itself is seeking enmity with other countries. Why is the borders of the Turkey with Armenia closed? Because in 1993, when Armenia launched direct military offensive from its territory on Azerbaijan, occupying Kalbajar region of Azerbaijan, using its right UN charter, Turkey closed its border because it's an aggressor state. And it's a result of Armenia's own occupational policy that Armenia became a self-isolated country. Therefore,
Yeah, there's this is definitely painting the picture for Azerbaijan in this. Like, the part where he's like, yeah, we work with the Soviets, we work with the former Soviet Union, we work with Russia, and then we have a very close partnership with Turkey, who's just kind of painting Armenia in a corner. But he's also talking about a previous conflict in 1993. The ceasefire was in 1994, but yeah, there was conflict also on the border of Turkey.
we see that in general, Turkey and Russia can play a role for the resolution of the conflict. Russia is also a member of the OSCE Minsk group, process, and also sharing relations with both of the countries, and historically and traditionally. Therefore, now is the time for Armenia makes a strategic choice. Again, what you have achieved as a result of this conflict, we become a self-isolated country with a big demographic problems, economic, social challenges.
Well, let's give the opportunity to Arslan Karatyan to respond.
Oh, there you go, shitting on Armenia again. Like, now Armenia probably going to come back and shit on Azerbaijan because that's their relationship.
To everything that you've just said. Hikmat, Arslan, what is your response?
Well, it's Hikmet, as a speaker, former speaker of the foreign ministry, probably knows by heart the Azerbaijani official language. It's fine. I don't want to congest with this rhetoric the viewers. But I have to make a couple of comments here, Professor. It's not a conflict between Turkey and Armenia. It's the Armenian genocide that has created the political geography that we're currently living in, and of course, big players making deals and making the borders that we live in, including the problem that comes with Nagorno-Karabakh, which was created by Joseph Stalin and Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. So Turkey is indeed part of this. Turkey is the only country and the big player in the region that has been directly backing Azerbaijan on its aggressive moves. In fact, Turkish Foreign Ministry made a statement openly saying that they will be backing Azerbaijan on anything that they go for. So we expect possibly similar aggressive behavior from Turkey. So Turkey's possible role as an independent mediator is out of question for us. Now, getting back to a lot of the accusations about the democratic process in
So yeah, if there's going to be a peace treaty, Turkey can't be involved. We brought up the Armenian genocide, which was committed by Turkey. So it is natural for the Armenians not wanting Turkey to be a part of this process. But I think Azerbaijan would use that as kind of leverage to get what they want. You don't want Turkey. Well, we're going to keep this going. We're going to drain this out until we can get our ally here to the negotiating table as well. In this case, Russia may be a decent mediator, but I don't think Russia wants to end the conflict. I think they just want to have the conflict keep going, keep selling arms to both sides, and then keep on using that Azerbaijani pipeline into Europe to sell natural gas.
Yeah, I understand that Mr. Hajiev and his administration are quite afraid that a similar situation can come around in Azerbaijan, and this regime that exists in Baku may have the same destiny as the kleptocratic regime that we had in Armenia. I know it's going to be hard. I know it's going to be tough. And what came around as a fact was the state-orchestrated demonstration 2 days ago in Baku, when Aliyev tried to take out people with a patriotic, Armenophobic, anti-Armenian notion, direct his own nation to go for war. In fact, 2 hours after people went out to the streets and had a chance to demonstrate, they started asking for resignation of your own cabinet members. 2 hours after that, they attacked your own parliament. So my feeling is that
they were protesting to go to war. And they were defending the parliament to prevent him from going in, which, protests like these do not happen in Azerbaijan because it's a dictatorship. It's technically a secular state, but it is a dictatorship. It's an authoritarian dictatorship. And so protests like this generally don't happen. If this happened in Iran, they would all be dead. So, but they handled it probably the best way they could. But the people were protesting not to overthrow the government. They were protesting to go to war with Armenia. So it is kind of a skew or slanted kind of view from the Armenians on this about what the protests are. But it's a one way to kind of shit on Azerbaijan in this case, because Azerbaijan just spent its time shitting on Armenia.
COVID-19 is not the only congestive thing happening in Azerbaijan. Democracy and the revolutionary process might end up coming to your homes. So be cautious about it. And we quite clearly understand that the public of Azerbaijan
worry about the policy of occupation against Azerbaijan.
Hikmat, please respond.
There they go, getting a little bit heated.
The floor is yours. Please respond. Are you worried that you're about to be toppled? Your
Don't
government's
worry
about to be
about the
toppled?
developments in Azerbaijan. In Azerbaijan, everything is in a stable. And what people in the streets, they had a just cause, an anger, because Azerbaijani people, especially IDPs and refugees, are tired. 30 years, they want to return back to their homes. As a result of the occupational policy of Armenia and your government, they can't return to your homes. Please bear the responsibility. Armenia is in a country that bears a state responsibility for the policy of occupation. And Azerbaijani public went to the street and they demanded a justice. And they also tired that 30 years negotiation process goes on within the Minsk group process, but without any particular result. That is in a current situation that we have in the region. And you made also claims to the Turkey. In your constitution, you have a territorial claims against Turkey. And you are considering it as a part of the greater Armenia. That is a narrative that you are building your youngsters and with the enmity towards your neighbors. And you have recently your government, I mean your previous government, but you're also part of the Pashinyan government, adopted new security doctrine.
Yeah, Greater Armenia, that did exist. And we showed that earlier, kind of on the stream, that territory. But yeah, that did exist. Now, as far as a territorial claim on Turkey, I'd have to look more into that. I'm not really sure on that end. But yeah, Greater Armenia was a thing that did exist at one point, and they got divided because the Armenians and the Turks have been at battle for a really long time.
The racist
You have had the
strategic
floor for a
document
little
by
while now.
Armenians not selected people in the region.
Let
What
me
is the
bring in
reality, Arsen?
Arsan
As a society, we
Karachian
find
very
the answers
quickly.
to these questions first.
Very quickly. Azerbaijan is stable. This is not about the fear of the government being toppled, as you said. What's your response to that, just very quickly?
Well, my feeling is that some of my colleagues say that Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan is more popular in Azerbaijan than Aliyev as a democratic leader.
That is a bird. Our leader in Armenia is more popular in Azerbaijan than the leader in Azerbaijan. That is a complete burn there. And you can see kind of the smirk on his face when he's saying it. Because this is just to entice an emotional response. This is just to kind of fuck with them because he just spent that time ragging on Armenia, which is one of the reasons why I don't know if this conflict will be solved in the near future. Because they really just have two complete competing ideologies and they just constantly just butt heads back and forth and they just spin the narrative to fit their own side. And they have no issue shitting on each other, throwing shit at each other, and it's really entertaining to watch. But unfortunately, there's not a ton of media on this. Like you have to go to the deep depths of Azerbaijani Twitter or find a sector of Armenian Twitter that isn't infiltrated by Azerbaijanis or bots. You know, there's a lot of Azerbaijani Twitter accounts that started this month. So it's one of those things that's really kind of great to see them here, the back and forth, kind of shitting on each other, but it also kind of explains kind of this conflict. Neither side is willing to give an inch in this conflict. And so we'll continue on.
I'm sure it's not Pashinyan, it's the democracy, it's the human rights, it's the aspiration for freedom of speech and other liberties that your citizens are deprived of. And this is the reason why the people are going to be out in the streets. We're seeing your own president yesterday has been talking about only 150 people becoming volunteers to go to the war. Neither your people nor our people want war. What we want is to go back to the negotiations table and discuss this. I will have to make one more comment, especially when it comes to the confidence building measures. You, together with your administration, back in the day, agreed for better monitoring of the borders. Why are you refusing it now? You're now coming and claiming and accusing us of attacks. Let's put those confidence building measures. Let's have monitors along the borderline. Let's have international people, international observers, monitors be on the border and tell us who is the one who triggers the conflict.
Let's talk about the conflict. Let's talk about conflict resolution. Ibrahim Freihat in Doha.
So yeah, that's kind of we want more people on the border so that there isn't kind of a conflict there, kind of deterrence. You know, putting these objector or observers there to observe whose side is which would be a good thing because then they could say, well, this fire came from there. It would give more clarity to the situation because it is kind of a he said, she said case. But it's also a strategy where if there were observers there, Azerbaijan's not going to attack Armenia. And so it is kind of a good move there for recommending that, especially like as this turns Armenia going into trying to get more Western support for their cause. Because right now, really the only country that I've seen on Twitter that's proposed their allegiance to them is Greece. But Greece also shares a border with Turkey. And so there's some animosity there as well. So we'll continue on.
Having heard the conversation here tonight between our guests in Yerevan and in Baku, it's clear that there are intractable, entrenched positions here. What can be done if Turkey and Russia can't bring the two sides to the negotiating table? What else can there be done? Clearly, it's not down to the Americans, maybe the French. Is there an international process to this?
Thank you. We used to say about the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians, peace process, it's a process without peace. But unfortunately, in this conflict, the peace process is no peace, not even, there's no even a process. So, which is even worse.
which is 100% correct. Like there isn't a process. Neither side's willing to give an inch, and they're really not willing to negotiate with one another.
Starting point would be actually from the Minsk group, the OSCE Minsk group that has been mediating in this conflict since 1994 and brought absolutely nothing, no changes, no progress. So we need to look into the role of the Minsk group and to see on what cases, on what basis they are mediating, and maybe to redefine the mandate of this group in order to be more effective. You can imagine how Russia and the United States are going to make peace. I mean, they have really bad relations between everywhere. So how are we expecting Russia and the United States, the Trump?
There's the Qatari slant right there. They have a bad relationship everywhere. Well, I mean, under Donald Trump, the United States probably has it everywhere. But before that, the United States had good relations in a lot of the world, just not necessarily in the Middle East or Asia.
Administration to make peace in Azerbaijan and Armenia. It's we need to look into this. Also, the two leaders, the two governments between Armenia and Azerbaijan, they definitely meet, they definitely talk, but they don't negotiate. The negotiation process proved to be pointless. No progress has been made either. So this is not the first clash. We had the clash in 2016, what's called the 4-day war between the two parties, and also before that there are these several talks. So we need more meaningful dialogue between the two parties to engage in serious dialogue so we can hopefully look into this. And I agree that confidence building measures are very important. They're key. They're a starting point, but we can't stop there. I mean, this is the war stopped in 1994, and no serious changes have been made. So I think
That is very well said. What he is saying is exactly what they need to do. The problem is neither country is willing to take those steps. But if they did, there could be some sort of negotiation, but I don't know how far each side. It would be a long, drawn out process to try and negotiate how the territory would be divided because it's not just going to be given to either Armenia or just Azerbaijan. It's going to have to be divvied up somehow, with unless there's a conflict.
engaging in a meaningful dialogue, meaningful negotiation with the two parties are willing to make painful concessions on both sides. There is no negotiation where one party can achieve, all what it wants. But the two parties willing to make this painful concessions on both sides, I think we can be, talking about seriously improvement. And one last thing we have to keep in mind for peace to happen between the two parties, that currently the two parties are losing. The status quo is not in Azerbaijan because the territory is under the Armenian control, but also Armenia is losing a lot of what we call the opportunity cost of the conflict is halting economic development in the region and is unable to make serious economic prosperity because of the conflict. So both parties have to realize that they are losing a lot. The status quo is not in their favor, and the status quo is not sustainable. And for that reason, they have to make courageous decisions and move forward.
A fascinating educational discussion. Thanks to all.
Yeah, that is a really good kind of discussion and gives a really good light into kind of the way each side goes into the conflict. And so what I have here is just kind of a world map. And so I'm just going to color in some of the areas. And like you said, it has the things right there. So here's Armenia. And right now, of the proposed countries, if it goes, there we go, is just Greece. Okay, with Azerbaijan, they got Turkey themselves and Pakistan. And also Israel. I've seen Israel, like you said, it's Azerbaijani Twitter, but Israel has supported them before. And so that's kind of the current conflict. But as we're hearing, there's a chance that Turkey can draw Russia into this on the side of Turkey, which really sucks for Armenia. So if Russia goes in there, and then China, Pakistan, because Pakistan jumps in, India is going to be right there. So you have China, and then you go into India. Now it's going to be kind of a World War III kind of doomsday map, but it's just kind of cool to see how it would kind of unfold. So there is a pact with Russia for Armenia with all these stands, but if Russia joins Azerbaijan, the map's going to start looking really grim for Armenia because Kazakhstan doesn't have that many people, big territory. And Mongolia is probably going to stay neutral. They're probably not going to do much, and so we'll just leave them there. But Turkmenistan is going to support Azerbaijan. Uzbekistan is going to support Azerbaijan. Afghanistan, probably not because they're in conflict. They'll probably remain neutral. But you have Tajikistan and then Kyrgyzstan. Now, these stands are going to go against their pact that they currently had with Armenia if Russia goes to Azerbaijan, if they are able to make that deal with Turkey. So because India gets involved, this is where it kind of gets interesting and some of the dominoes start falling. Great Britain's going to get involved. Okay, and if Great Britain gets involved, then some of the other NATO countries will join Greece because Turkey is kind of one of those places where they're in NATO, but they're not necessarily the best actor of NATO. But we'll just go along here, say Portugal, France, you have Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, Norway, Poland, Czech Republic. It'll go. Okay, I don't know about Slovakia, but you have Italy. And the other one that's going to be interesting here in what used to be Yugoslavia is Serbia is going to support Azerbaijan, which is going to turn these around their red, but also may create a battle in this area. So the United States doesn't want to get into another war, especially with the terrain in Armenia, but they may have to be dragged into this, may have to be involved. So with Serbia, Bosnia, you're going to get Croatia, and then I'd say Slovenia as well. Now Montenegro will probably label Serbia. You have Kosovo. Albania is kind of one of those ones that may go either way, but for this case, we'll just say they're going against Serbia. Bulgaria will probably join Turkey. Romania will be right there. And then it just starts blowing up from there. And it's just kind of like this isn't meant to be taken seriously. It's just kind of like, well, if this conflict breaks up and Russia jumps in on the side of Turkey, where's everybody going to align? So Belarus, of course, is going to be with Russia. Okay, and then you have Montenegro. Right there, Bulgaria. I'm not sure where Bulgaria will fall. Hungary, same thing. Ukraine's going to go against Russia, and so are the Baltics. So we have Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine. Now, Georgia, they're generally kind of the peacekeeper in the region, but they would generally go against the Soviets. Sweden neutral. Austria would probably jump in on the red side. Switzerland neutral. Luxembourg I mean, technically in NATO. So, and then you have Slovakia and Hungary. And I think if all the countries go around them that way, I think they fall in line there. And then Romania, I think, will stay as neutral as they can. North Macedonia, I think they're going to go there. And so that's kind of how the Europe map kind of folds into place. And we'll add Italy. Cyprus is one that's going to be mixed, so I'll just leave that blank there. So, but Syria fought with the Armenians. I think there's a case to be made, especially with Israel supporting Azerbaijan, for Syria and Lebanon to go that route. Jordan, I think, is going to remain neutral. Iraq is interesting as well. I think northern Iraq would be against Turkey. Southern Iraq may be for there, but I will mark them in red. Now you have one of the bigger dominoes to go. So you have Iran. So you have Pakistan here, you have Turkey, you have Russia, you have China. So I think those cases being considered, even though Iran would be fighting on the side of Israel, that they would go in for Azerbaijan, which would turn Saudi Arabia on the good side, the Emirates. Qatar's going to be interesting. And then, of course, Kuwait. Okay, so Iran goes there. Now, Yemen, kind of a conflict and war. I think that, and I think Oman will remain neutral. Qatar probably won't fight. It's going to be on the side of Iran. And then I read an article today, Iran's involved in Somalia, but the Somalian government isn't really that great. So Egypt is interesting as well, but I think they would go on the side of the Israelis. So Libya, kind of divided again. Tunisia, I think, would go red in this battle. Now, as far as the other African countries, I don't know to what involve. Sudan is interesting as well, and I think they would side with Egypt. And, of course, if they side with Egypt, South Sudan is going to side the other way, which could draw in a bunch of different conflicts here in Africa. Now, with this, I think North Korea would take this opportunity to join in, maybe arm, but I don't know if they would go after the South. But if North Korea gets involved, then you have South Korea and Japan and probably the Philippines. Even though the Philippines is interesting because there's more of an influence of China there. So even though they have good ties to America, I think they'll try to remain neutral in this fight. Australia and New Zealand will be on that side. And so some of these other countries, I want to say for right now, we'll just leave them where they're at. So Indonesia. Now this comes into the point where America is going to jump into the conflict. Okay, so we have this conflict in Europe and Asia. And so America's kind of in a tough spot because they're allies with Turkey. They're also allies with Greece and a bunch of these other countries. And so I think America is going to go red, and Canadians, Greenland, Iceland is going to be red. I think Mexico stays neutral. I think Venezuela and Colombia may have a conflict there. If I can get the, for a reason that's not working, there we go. And then I think South Africa will also be red in this conflict. So because America jumps in, I want to say some of these islands in the South Pacific, if there was one to go on the side of America, it would be Thailand, potentially Cambodia and Laos, which Vietnam, probably going to go blue. The United States needs to increase relations with Vietnam. And then Taiwan is going to go red. Which you look at this worldwide conflict, and Brazil, I think Brazil would join the side of the Americans, as well as Chile. Argentina is kind of a wild card, but they would probably end up joining this side. Uruguay is going to stay neutral. Paraguay is going to stay neutral. Bolivia may, if they get an opportunity, jump in on the other side, but I don't see them doing much in the battle. But just for the sake of kind of filling out the map, it goes there. Now, the only other major nation is going to be Indonesia here for kind of a global conflict. And they could support really either side, but they don't really have much to gain. So I think they may sit this one out unless something breaks up here in Papua New Guinea. So, but that's kind of like the doomsday scenario. And just kind of looking at this, you have India and Pakistan, North Korea, South Korea, Azerbaijan, Armenia. You have the conflict here with Serbia. You have conflict in the Middle East. And then you potentially, probably more so here, Colombia and Venezuela, you have potential for conflict there as well. Now, I don't believe this conflict will ever jump up and blow up to something like we see here in this map. But it is definitely something that is just interesting to kind of visualize kind of where the dominoes could fall. Like I said, there are countries that are in a very interesting spot. So Russia, for instance, if Russia decided to back Armenia, then a lot of these stands go red. China still is blue. And so Turkey would probably have a very tough time if they can't convince the Russians to help them out. All the military support from Russia. So, like I said, America's probably going to be one of the last ones to join a conflict right here, just given the sentiment in the nation as far as what's going on. But it was just interesting to see how, just looking at the different conflicts, Iran's going to be very conflicted in this because they don't want to be on the side of Israel. But Israel could also switch too. Israel could stop backing Azerbaijan and back Greece as well, which creates a problem with them if they ever have to go into Iran. So, interesting dynamic and how it could break down. Like I said, the first major players were going to be Turkey, Pakistan, Azerbaijan, and then Greece and Armenia. But it could evolve into a global conflict, probably not remotely close to doing so. Because I think most people would be satisfied with just Turkey or even Azerbaijan and Armenia going back and forth and not getting involved. But if Turkey gets involved, it changes the dynamic a little bit. But I don't know if anybody would even go in if it was with Turkey unless it's going to be Greece, but they'll probably just fight more on their border back and forth or the Isle of Cyprus. So, interesting dynamic. The video we watched is very good, even though, like I said, it's from the Qatari government. But the fact that they could bring somebody in from Armenia and from Azerbaijan, from the governments to speak on that platform, and then have an intermediate neutral, kind of neutral party in Qatar, so a professor from Qatar there, to kind of showcase the debate between the two. But there is a division here that's not going to be solved easily because, once again, bringing up the map, like neither side is willing to give an inch in this conflict. They're not willing to give an inch at all. Yeah, and Ruffy is kind of right here. So Armenia is happy with the status quo, but Azerbaijan isn't. Yeah, because I mean, the territory is occupied by ethnic Armenians. And so they'd be happy if this border never changed. And that is true. But if you're looking for a peace settlement here, maybe giving up this slice of Armenia to connect Azerbaijan right there could be good enough, but I don't know if Azerbaijan would even accept that. And so, they can't really divide it down the middle because there's a river here. They could use the river as kind of a boundary, I guess, and try to connect those two. But I don't think that's a solution that Azerbaijan would accept, and it's not a solution that Armenia would accept at this point either. So it is one of these worldwide conflicts that's absolutely crazy because you don't know anything other than they hate each other and not willing to give an inch. But there's other world players that are involved. Like if Russia didn't have the relationship with Azerbaijan, then it would be a interesting conflict. But because Russia has the potential for joining Azerbaijan, it could evolve into a world conflict to save the Armenians. Yeah, the problem is they want to remove the Armenians. Azerbaijan views this as their territory. It is something that is legally Azerbaijan territory, but it's occupied by Armenians. It is something that is really strange, and it's another thing that you can attribute to Stalin. But as far as a peaceful solution to this conflict, as of right now, unless you can get the sides together and you can get them to actually negotiate rather than just blame each other, which is none of the rhetoric that's been seen in this conflict. So it's probably one that's going to end up in a war. And with Turkey taking a staunch stance and Pakistan taking a staunch stance to help Azerbaijan, and then Greece backing Armenia, and the history of Israel with Azerbaijan makes this an extremely interesting conflict to go in, to watch, to discuss. And so I'm interested in this region in particular to see what's going to happen moving forward. But it may be something like, well, they had this little skirmish here. 4 years later, they have another skirmish there. But I don't know what it would take to trigger a war here or trigger a peace here. It is one of the strangest conflicts in the world, but we're just going to have to watch it unfold. So I want to thank everybody for joining and thank for the participation in the chat. And you guys have a good night. And like I said, just the topic that I wanted to cover. I don't see too many people covering it, and I just find it absolutely fascinating. So thanks for joining me, and have a good night.